Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a real heavyweight, diving deep into the sources on Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. We're aiming to really get under the skin of this novel.
Absolutely. And you can't really grasp Crime and Punishment without understanding Dostoevsky's own brush with death. The sources really stress how themes like crime, punishment, even commutation were deeply personal for him.
That's such a crucial starting point.
hmm
He was literally minutes from execution, standing there tied to a stake, thinking his life was over.
Can you imagine seeing others let out, writing frantic last words, and then at the absolute last second, the sentences change? To hard labor in Siberia, yes, but changed.
That whole ordeal, the confrontation with mortality, the reprieve, the long suffering that followed, it's like the emotional blueprint for the book, isn't it?
It really is, and that sets our mission for this deep dive, to really map out Rodion Raskolnikov's world. We'll look closely at the characters around him, the key plot points from the crime itself right through to the end, and, importantly, the philosophy driving him.
Before we even meet Raskolnikov properly, though, the setting hits you. St. Petersburg in summer. It's oppressive. The sources talk about this awful heat, the lack of air, dust everywhere.
Bricks, scaffolding, yeah. And that special Petersburg stench, as the text calls it. It's described as physically painful, working on Raskolnikov's already frayed nerves.
It's more than just scene setting, it feels like.
Yeah.
Like, the city itself is part of his breakdown.
Definitely. It's a pressure cooker. The heat, the noise, the poverty, the constant stream of drunkards, it all feeds into his psychological state, undermining any idea he has of committing a cool, rational crime. This environment is actively shaping his descent.
Okay, let's bring in the man himself, Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov. What's his initial state when we meet him?
Well, he's a former student, obviously intelligent, but living in absolute squalor, terribly poor, but also incredibly proud, quite reserved, cutting himself off from people. The sources paint a picture of concentrated wretchedness and gloomy excitement.
Gloomy excitement.
Yeah.
That's telling. Like he's almost nursing his misery.
Exactly. And that pride, that sense of intellectual superiority despite his poverty, that's really key. It's what allows him to even conceive of targeting Alyona Ivanovna, the pawnbroker.
Ah, yes, the victim. Describe her for us. The sources aren't kind.
No, they're brutal. She's called an awful old harpy, charges outrageous interest rates, something like 5 to 7% a month, gives next to nothing for pawned items. Raskolnikov gets barely 1.5 rubles for a watch supposedly worth 4.
And it's not just that she's greedy. Raskolnikov sees her as actively harmful, right? Doing actual mischief.
Precisely. Spiteful, ailing, horrid, the description frames her as this useless negative force. Her perceived worthlessness is essential for Raskolnikov's justification to even begin forming.
Which brings us to that crucial tavern scene, the overheard conversation.
Yes, this is pivotal. Raskolnikov just happens to be there when a student and an officer are discussing this very pawnbroker. And the student basically says her life is worth no more than the life of a louse.
Chilling stuff. And he contrasts that with the good her money could do.
He does. He talks about 100,000 good deeds, saving whole families from poverty and ruin. It's this stark utilitarian calculation. Her single, supposedly worthless life weighed against thousands potentially saved.
And Raskolnikov just absorbs this simple arithmetic, as the source calls it.
He internalizes it completely. It gives his own developing, rather nebulous ideas a concrete, seemingly logical justification for murder.
So this idea takes root. Then he does the trial run.
Right. He goes to her flat, pretending he wants to pawn something else, his father's old silver watch, a little gold ring. But it's not really about the pawning. It's reconnaissance, checking the layout, the locks, her movements.
And then comes that moment of overhearing Lizaveta, her sister.
Yes. This is huge. He overhears Lizaveta talking to someone, arranging to be out of the flat the very next day at exactly 7 o'clock in the evening.
And for Raskolnikov, this isn't just luck.
No, not at all. He sees it as fate, as an irrevocable decision being made for him. The source says he felt he'd lost his freedom of thought. It's like the universe, or maybe the devil in his mind, has set the time and place. He feels compelled now.
It completely undercuts his whole idea of acting out of pure, rational free will, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Dostoevsky subtly introduces this element of fatalism right from the start.
Okay, chapter 2. The act itself. It starts with finding the weapon.
Which is almost comically desperate. He doesn't have a proper weapon. He ends up grabbing an axe he finds hidden under the porter's bench in the courtyard. It's just there. And again, this feeds his fatalism. When reason fails, the devil helps, he thinks.
The murder scene is brutal. He kills Alyona Ivanovna, but then the plan Immediately falls apart.
Completely. Because Lizaveta, the sister, the one who was supposed to be out, she comes back early, walks right in.
Oh, God. And her murder wasn't part of the plan at all.
Absolutely not. It's described as entirely unintentional. Panic, shock. But it instantly doubles the crime, complicates everything, and turns his philosophical act against a louse into this messy, bloody, chaotic reality involving someone clearly innocent.
The sources describe him just frantically searching afterwards, right? Not thinking clearly.
Total chaos. He's scrambling for money, jewelry, whatever he can find, trying to avoid the blood. He barely gets anything significant, just a small purse and some trinkets stuffed in his pockets. He's completely ill-suited to the practical side of crime.
And he almost gets caught immediately.
Right away. Two men, Kok and Pistryakov, a merchant and a law student, come to the door. They ring the bell, then start banging, convince someone's inside because the door is latched from within.
That must have been terrifying. How does he escape?
It's pure luck and quick thinking. He manages to slip the latch quietly, waits for them to go downstairs briefly, then darts out and hides in an empty flat on the floor below that happens to be open and being renovated. A heart-stopping moment. Then he just melts back into the street crowd.
It just highlights how fragile his whole intellectual edifice is when faced with, actual reality.
Exactly. His grand theory provides zero protection against basic human error and chance.
So after the murders, Raskolnikov basically collapses, physically and mentally.
Completely. He falls into this intense fever, delirium. Days just pass in a blur, a sort of heavy, leaden sleep, as the source puts it. His body is reacting, even if his mind is trying to rationalize. This sickness is his immediate punishment.
But his mind isn't blank during this time, is it? There are dreams or daydreams.
Yeah. Yes, and very specific ones. The source highlights this recurring image of an oasis in Africa. Cool, clear blue water, clean sand, glistening stones.
Wow. The total opposite of grimy, stifling St. Petersburg.
Exactly. It's this powerful subconscious yearning for escape, for purity, for cleansing, a desperate contrast to the filth and blood of the crime.
And right in the middle of this feverish state, he gets a police summons.
Talk about terror. He must assume it's over. That they know, but the irony is savage. It's just about the debt he owes his landlady, Praskovya Pavlovna. A completely mundane issue.
But his reaction gives him away.
It does. He goes to the police station, still weak and shaky. And while he's there, the officers happen to be discussing the murders, just talking shop, maybe watching reactions. And the moment the subject comes up, Raskolnikov faints dead away.
Oh, man. So even that accidental conversation flags him?
Immediately, it plants the first seed of suspicion. Porfiry later points to this exact moment, confirming his theory that a guilty man's own nerves, his temperament, will inevitably betray him.
It's around this time, during this period of illness and instability, that he encounters Marmeladov.
Yes, he stumbles into a tavern, almost drawn there, and meets Semyon Zaharovich Marmeladov. And this encounter introduces the whole counter-narrative to Raskolnikov's nihilism, the theme of suffering, humility, and faith.
What's Marmeladov like? The sources paint a pretty bleak picture.
Oh, absolutely. He's over 50, balding, bloated face with this sickly yellow-greenish complexion from constant drinking. He holds the title of titular counselor, a low civil service rank, which somehow makes his degradation even more pathetic in public.
And he just opens up to Raskolnikov, a complete stranger.
Instantly. He's intensely talkative, almost performing his misery. He justifies his drinking, blames his wife Katerina Ivanovna for being strict, kept in order at home, he says. He launches into this long, rambling, self-pitying monologue about his family's horrific poverty.
He talks about his wife Katerina Ivanovna, who's sick.
Yes, she's proud, comes from a better background, but she's dying of consumption and driven half mad by their circumstances. And they have 3 small children. The whole family is starving.
But the real focus becomes his daughter, Sonia.
Sofia Semyonovna, yes. Marmeladov reveals with a kind of theatrical despair that Sonia has been forced into prostitution to support them. It's simply a question of starvation, he says. There was no other way.
He draws a contrast between her sacrifice and others, doesn't he? Even mentioning Raskolnikov's sister.
He does. He says, Raskolnikov's sister Dunya might consider marriage for comfort or luxuries. But Sonia's sacrifice is absolute, born of sheer survival needs. It's presented as something pure, despite the circumstances.
And then he has that incredibly passionate speech about forgiveness.
It's extraordinary. He ends his drunken confession with this vision of Judgment Day, declaring that Christ will welcome the lowest, the drunkards, the children of shame, like Sonia. He says Christ will forgive them precisely because they felt so unworthy. Not one of them believed himself to be worthy of this.
So right away, Sonia is framed not just as a victim, but as someone embodying this deep, paradoxical Christian ideal of redemption through suffering and humility.
Exactly. She's set up as the spiritual antidote to Raskolnikov's proud intellectual despair.
While Raskolnikov is reeling from the crime and meeting the Marmeladovs, he gets news from home that pulls him into another conflict. His mother's letter.
Right, a long, detailed letter. And it throws him into turmoil about his sister, Avdotya Romanovna Dunya. The letter reveals what she went through working as a governess for the Svidrigailov family.
Svidrigailov. That name comes up again later, ominously. What happened there?
Arkady Ivanovich Svidrigailov, the man of the house, made advances towards Dunya. His wife, Marfa Petrovna, found out, or suspected, and initially flew into a rage, publicly accusing Dunya of trying to seduce her husband, spreading terrible rumors.
That must have been humiliating for Dunya.
Immensely. Although the source notes Marfa Petrovna later realized she was wrong, found proof of Dunya's innocence, and actually went around town publicly retracting the slander and showing everyone Dunya's letters. So Dunya was vindicated, but the whole affair was degrading.
But the letter isn't just about the past. There's a new development.
Yes. The main news is that Dunya is now engaged to be married to Pyotr Petrovich Luzhin.
And Raskolnikov's reaction is not positive.
Not at all. He's horrified. Luzhin is older, around 45, described as rather foppish, calculating, clearly well off. Raskolnikov instantly sees this as another terrible sacrifice. Dunya marrying for money, for security, to help him and their mother. He equates it morally with Sonia having to sell herself.
He sees it as a kind of prostitution, just respectable on the surface.
Exactly. Unbearable, especially when he learns more about Luzhin's character and philosophy.
What is Luzhin's philosophy? He seems to represent something specific.
Oh, he absolutely does. He embodies this cold, rational self-interest that was becoming fashionable. Utilitarianism twisted into pure selfishness. He actually argues that pursuing your own economic advantage is the best way to help society.
How does he justify that?
He gives this example about a coat. He says something like, if you sacrifice your coat, meaning give it away altruistically, you only impoverish the general stock. But if he focuses on his own success, then eventually I'll bring to pass my neighbors getting a little more than just a torn coat, maybe through employment or general prosperity.
Wow. So greed is good, basically. Practicality over feelings.
Pretty much. Idealism and sentimentality are dismissed. It's all about rational economic principles. He's the perfect contrast to Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov theorizes about immorality. Luzhin lives a kind of calculated, respectable immorality.
While Raskolnikov is dealing with all this, the aftermath of the crime, the Marmeladovs, Dunya's engagement, he does have some support, right? His friend Razumihin steps up.
Dmitry Prokofyevich Razumihin, yes. He's such a great character. He's Raskolnikov's university friend, loyal, energetic, practical, hardworking, a real anchor. When Raskolnikov is sick and delirious, Razumihin basically takes over, nurses him, gets him clean clothes.
Doesn't he also offer him work?
He does. He suggests some translation work, but the source implies it's mostly a lie. Just a way to give Raskolnikov a sense of purpose, some money, and draw him back into the world. It's a compassionate gesture.
And Razumihin takes an interest in Dunya pretty quickly, too, doesn't he?
Almost immediately. You see the seeds of that alternative, healthier future for Dunya being planted early on.
There's also the doctor, Zosimov.
Zosimov, yes. He offers a more clinical view. He diagnoses Raskolnikov somewhat loosely as a monomaniac, obsessed with one fixed idea, though he does add, interestingly, that a normal man, it is true, hardly exists, which kind of softens it, suggesting everyone's a bit off-kilter.
And this idea of a fixed idea leads us directly to the core philosophy of the book, Raskolnikov's article.
The theory of the extraordinary man. Yes, this is absolutely central. It's the intellectual engine driving the entire plot. And it comes up when the examining magistrate, Porfiry Petrovich, reveals he's read an article Raskolnikov published months earlier.
We really need to unpack this theory. What's the gist?
Okay, so Raskolnikov argues in this article that humanity is fundamentally divided into two types of people. There are the ordinary masses.
The material.
Right, the material. Their purpose is just to reproduce, to obey the law, to maintain the status quo. They are conservative by nature.
And the second type.
The extraordinary. These are the rare individuals, the geniuses, the leaders, the Newtons, the Napoleons, who have the gift or the burden of saying a new word, of moving humanity forward.
And here's the really radical part. Their relationship to law.
Exactly. Raskolnikov claims these extraordinary individuals have an inner right, a right derived from their mission or their genius to overstep certain obstacles.
Obstacles like morality, laws, other people's lives.
Precisely. If their idea, the new word they need to deliver, requires it for its practical fulfillment, they have the right, perhaps even the duty, to eliminate obstacles. This includes committing crimes, even murder.
He uses historical figures to justify this.
He does. He argues that figures like Kepler or Newton couldn't have advanced human knowledge without actions that likely harmed others indirectly or directly. He posits that if Newton needed to kill one or a dozen or even 100 people who stood in the way of his discoveries becoming known, he would have had the right, even the obligation, to do so.
It's that simple arithmetic again, but applied to genius and progress. One death or 100 deaths for the sake of humanity's advancement.
Yes. It's chillingly logical in its own warped way. And crucially, for Raskolnikov himself, the murder of Alyona Ivanovna wasn't primarily about her money or even helping others. It was an experiment.
To see which category he belonged to.
Exactly, to find out definitively whether I was a louse like everybody else or a man. Could he dare to transgress? Did he possess the inner strength and right of the extraordinary man? The murder was meant to be the proof.
This abstract, terrifying theory crashes headlong into brutal reality again with Marmeladov's death.
Yes, the world refuses to stay theoretical for Raskolnikov. Marmeladov, drunk, falls under the wheels of a carriage and is fatally injured. It happens right near Raskolnikov.
And Raskolnikov, despite his supposed nihilism, gets involved.
He does. He instinctively rushes to help, directs people to carry Marmeladov to his home, which turns out to be Sonia's tiny rented room in the Kapernaumof's building.
And then he does something completely out of character for his theory.
Utterly. Seeing the destitution, Katerina Ivanovna's despair, the terrified children, he impulsively gives Katerina Ivanovna all the money he has, the 25 rubles his mother had just sent him for the funeral.
He regrets this later, doesn't he? But not in the way you'd expect.
Right. He calls it an unpardonable thing later when talking to Sonia. Not because he regrets the generosity, but because it was an instinctive, emotional act. It wasn't calculated. It showed weakness, humanity, contradicting his extraordinary man persona.
Marmeladov's death scene itself is harrowing.
It's awful. He briefly recognizes Katerina Ivanovna, and then his eyes fix on his youngest favorite daughter, little Lida. His last words, gasped out while pointing at her, are just, "Barefoot, barefoot." It's this final, crushing realization of the poverty and suffering he's leaving behind.
After this, Raskolnikov seeks out Sonia again. He feels drawn to her.
Yes, almost magnetically. He goes to her room, and in a really pivotal scene, he asks her, almost demands her to read to him from the New Testament.
And she reads the story of Lazarus.
The resurrection of Lazarus from the Gospel of John, chapter 11. This is hugely significant. Lazarus, dead for 4 days, called back to life by Christ.
The symbolism is pretty direct for Raskolnikov's situation.
Absolutely. The source emphasizes how Sonia reads it with trembling, breathless intensity and devotion. It's not just reading, it's like a personal testament, a confession of her own profound faith in resurrection and redemption, even from the depths. It implicitly offers Raskolnikov that same hope, contrasting sharply with his nihilistic despair. It presents her path, faith, and humility as the way out.
But things descend into chaos again pretty quickly with a funeral meal for Marmeladov.
Oh, the memorial dinner. It's a disaster. Katerina Ivanovna, trying desperately to maintain some dignity and put on a respectable show, hosts it in their cramped room. But it's disorganized. The guests are mostly poor lodgers. Some get drunk. Arguments break out. It's pure social breakdown.
And Luzhin sees this as an opportunity.
His moment for revenge. He'd been furious after Dunya broke off the engagement, blaming Raskolnikov. So he shows up at this chaotic gathering with a plan.
The planted money.
Exactly. He discreetly slips a 100-ruble note into Sonia's pocket while pretending to offer condolences or charity. Then, a little later, he very loudly and publicly accuses her of stealing it from him.
Vile. What was his goal?
To utterly destroy Sonia's reputation, she was already vulnerable and, by extension, to discredit Raskolnikov, who had shown compassion towards her and publicly associated with her. He wanted to paint them both as thieves and lowlifes, thereby justifying Dunya's rejection of him.
But his plan backfires, doesn't it? Because of Lebeziatnikov.
Beautifully ironic, yes. Andrei Semyonovich Lebeziatnikov, Luzhin's roommate, is this young, earnest proponent of radical, progressive, almost absurdly utopian ideas. He even has theories about how Sonia's profession will be seen as perfectly normal in the future communist society.
So not exactly a pillar of traditional morality.
Not at all. But he happens to have witnessed Luzhin secretly putting the money in Sonia's pocket earlier. And despite his own, sometimes nonsensical philosophies, Lebeziatnikov has a basic sense of fairness. He speaks up and exposes Luzhin's lie.
So Luzhin is ruined. Publicly disgraced.
Completely. It's a masterful touch by Dostoevsky, the cynical, calculating, practical man undone by the naive, flawed idealist.
What happens to Katerina Ivanovna after this?
It's the final straw for her. The accusation against Sonia, the public humiliation, the chaos of the dinner she snaps. She gets into a screaming match with the landlady, Amalia Ludvigovna, or Ivanovna, the name shifts, is violently thrown out and runs hysterically into the streets, trying to force her children to beg and perform, seeking some kind of impossible justice. It's utterly tragic.
Raskolnikov is now caught between these intense external pressures and his own internal battle. This leads him into direct confrontation with two major figures, Porfiry and Svidrigailov.
Yes, these encounters are crucial. They represent the intellectual and the moral challenges to his theory, respectively. First, Porfiry Petrovich, the magistrate.
Their interactions aren't typical police interviews, are they?
Not at all. It's pure psychological warfare. Porfiry basically plays cat and mouse with Raskolnikov. The source explains his strategy. He relies almost entirely on Raskolnikov's own psychology, his temperament, to betray him.
He admits he suspected him early on.
Right from the fainting spell at the station. He tells Raskolnikov he suspected him then. He even admits he searched Raskolnikov's room secretly but found nothing, sensed, he says, in vain. But lack of evidence doesn't deter him. He believes guilt manifests itself psychologically. The temperament reflects everything like a mirror, he insists.
So he deliberately tries to provoke Raskolnikov.
Constantly. He reveals he orchestrated that earlier conversation about the murder with Razumihin and Zametov just to observe Raskolnikov's reaction, to excite him. He circles the topic, drops hints, discusses Raskolnikov's article on crime, all with this unnervingly calm, almost friendly, yet deeply probing manner.
He's banking on Raskolnikov cracking under the pressure.
Exactly. He tells Raskolnikov he doesn't need mathematically clear proof. He believes the guilty party, isolated and tormented, will eventually confess or make a fatal slip-up. He predicts the criminal might even return to the scene or faint at a crucial moment, precisely things Raskolnikov has done or will do.
Raskolnikov must be furious, terrified.
He is. He accuses Porfiry of torturing him, demands to be arrested or left alone. The tension becomes almost unbearable. But just as it reaches its peak,
The unexpected confession.
Nikolai the painter walks in. He'd been working in the building, found some of the stolen jewelry dropped on the stairs, panicked, tried to pawn it, got scared, and now, misunderstanding the situation, he blurts out a confession to the murders.
Which lets Raskolnikov off the hook, temporarily.
Temporarily, yes. Porfiry has to let him go. But Porfiry knows Nikolai isn't the real killer. As Raskolnikov leaves, Porfiry privately assures him the case isn't closed, whispering, "No, it was you, Rodion Romanovich, and no one else." He even reveals he knows Raskolnikov revisited the crime scene. He's been watching his every move.
If Porfiry is the intellectual threat, Svidrigailov is something else entirely. The moral double.
Arkady Ivanovich Svidrigailov. He's a truly disturbing figure. Marfa Petrovna's widower, remember? He comes across as utterly depraved, amoral, yet strangely compelling. He represents someone who has seemingly lived beyond good and evil, like Raskolnikov wants to, but the result is chilling.
The sources mention his dark past.
Oh yes, hints of serious debts, maybe cheating at cards. But much darker rumors, two suggestions he was responsible for the death of his serf, Philip, through brutality. And, most horribly, the story of a young deaf-mute girl, maybe 14 or 15, who killed herself after being violated by him. He's lived a life of unchecked desires.
And yet he's haunted. He sees ghosts.
This is one of the strangest things about him. He calmly tells Raskolnikov he's been visited 3 times by the ghost of his dead wife, Marfa Petrovna. But the visits aren't dramatic or accusatory, they're mundane. She complains about trivial domestic things, gives him advice on travel plans.
That's almost more terrifying than a vengeful spirit.
Exactly. He has this theory about it that ghosts are maybe shreds and fragments of other worlds, visible only to the sick whose normal earthly order is broken. It implies his own moral sickness allows him to see these fragments, but the horror is their banality. His punishment isn't hellfire, it's being eternally pestered by the ghost of his tedious marriage.
He seems to embody a potential future for Raskolnikov, doesn't he? A life without guilt, but empty and haunted.
Precisely. He's the dark mirror. And he's still fixated on Dunya. He offers her a large sum of money, 10,000 rubles, supposedly to help her break free from Luzhin, but his motives are clearly suspect, though confusingly, he also does genuinely charitable things, like arranging financial support for the Marmeladov orphans. He's a complex mix of vice and occasional detached generosity.
The pressure from Porfiry, the disturbing mirror of Svidrigailov, It all pushes Raskolnikov towards Sonia again, doesn't it? Towards confession.
Inescapably. He goes to her and finally breaks down. He confesses everything that he killed both Elyona Ivanovna and Lizaveta.
And he explains his real motive.
Yes. He makes it clear it wasn't hunger, not poverty, not even primarily the money. It was the idea, the experiment, to find out whether I was a louse like everybody else or a man, to prove he had the right to transgress because of his supposed intellectual superiority. But the confession itself is an admission of failure. He couldn't bear the weight of the act. His temperament, his conscience proved him a louse after all.
How does Sonia react? This must be devastating for her.
Her reaction is immediate, profound compassion mixed with horror. But she doesn't just pity him. She takes command, spiritually. She insists he must confess publicly, atone.
That's when she gives him the famous instruction.
Yes. Go at once, this very minute, stand at the crossroads, bow down, first kiss the earth which you have defiled, and then bow down to all the world and say to all men aloud, I am a murderer. It's a demand for public humility, for acknowledging his connection to the suffering world he tried to stand above.
And she gives him a cross.
Lizaveta's simple wooden cross. She tells him they will bear their suffering together. It's the ultimate symbol of shared burden and the path of expiation through faith, the direct opposite of his isolating pride.
While Raskolnikov is grappling with confession, Dunya has her own terrifying encounter with Svidrigailov.
A real showdown. She agrees to meet him alone, dangerously. He reveals he knows about Raskolnikov's confession, essentially trying to use it as blackmail or leverage to control her.
He tries to force himself on her.
Yes, he locks the door, makes his intentions clear. But Dunya is stronger than he anticipates. She pulls out a revolver, actually. It was Marfa Petrovna's revolver, which adds another layer of irony.
And she uses it.
She fires. Once, maybe twice, one shot grazes his temple. It's not a fatal wound, but it's a definitive rejection. In that moment, Svidrigailov seems to finally understand that Dunya will never love him, never yield to him willingly.
What happens then? It's a turning point for him.
It seems to break something in him. That hope, however perverse, of connection or control through Dunya is gone. He experiences this wave of despair, hands her the key, and just lets her leave. His last link to potentially redeeming human feelings seems severed.
So Svidrigailov proceeds towards his own end.
Methodically. First, he settles his affairs. He makes concrete arrangements for the Marmeladov children's future, ensuring they'll be cared for. He gives Sonia a significant sum of money, too. Acts of detached, final charity.
Then he finds a place to stay.
A truly wretched little room in a miserable hotel. Dirty, low-ceiling, yellow wallpaper. It mirrors his internal state, this squalid endpoint.
And he has one last horrifying dream.
Yes, the source details this chilling nightmare. He finds a little girl, maybe 5 years old, shivering cold in a hallway. He feels a moment of pity, takes her into his room, covers her, but then, in the dream, her face transforms. She develops this knowing, lewd, utterly depraved look, the look of a French harlot, the text says.
Yeah, that's hideous.
It confirms his deepest cynicism about innocence and corruption. He wakes up in absolute horror. It seems to finalize his decision that the world itself is irredeemably sordid.
And then he acts.
He walks out into the damp, foggy morning. He finds a watchman, tells him with grim irony that he's going to America, a slang term for suicide. Then he raises the revolver, the same one Dunya used on him, and shoots himself in the street. The path of nihilism ends in self-annihilation.
Meanwhile, Raskolnikov is preparing for the opposite path. Confession.
He says his goodbyes to his mother, who is sadly deteriorating, perhaps already sensing the tragedy without fully understanding it. He tells Dunya he approves of Razumihin, essentially giving his blessing.
And then he follows Sonia's instruction, goes to the crossroads.
He goes to the Haymarket, a bustling, dirty public square, and he does it. He kneels down, bows, and kisses the filthy earth, just as Sonia told him. He starts to say, I am a murderer.
How does the crowd react?
With mockery. Someone yells out, he's boozed! They just think he's drunk. His grand gesture of spiritual abasement is met with ridicule and indifference. Another harsh dose of reality.
But he goes through with the formal confession.
Yes. He goes to the police station, finds Ilya Petrovich, the explosive lieutenant he'd encountered before, and confesses fully.
What's the outcome? The sentence.
Because he confessed, because the robbery motive seemed weak, he hadn't even really used the money or valuables, which were found hidden under a stone. Because of his illness and generally good prior character, and maybe Porphyry putting in a word, he gets a relatively lenient sentence for the time. 8 years of penal servitude in Siberia.
And the epilogue takes us to Siberia. Sonia follows him there.
She does. She finds work as a seamstress nearby and visits him when she can. But the key point in the epilogue, according to the sources, is that Raskolnikov still hasn't truly repented for the crime itself. Not initially.
What is he tormented by then?
His failure. His weakness. He still clings to the idea of the extraordinary man. He despises himself not for murdering, but for not being strong enough to bear the burden of the transgression without confessing. He sees his confession as cowardice, a failure of his intellect, giving in to some base instinct he couldn't overcome. He hasn't reached moral repentance, only intellectual regret for failing his own test.
But there's hope at the end. A change begins.
Yes, slowly, gradually, through Sonia's unwavering, patient love and presence, and through his own suffering and isolation among the other convicts who instinctively dislike him for his intellectual arrogance, he starts to see the fundamental falsity in himself and his convictions.
So, the resurrection promised by the Lazarus story is possible, but it's a long process.
Exactly. The novel ends not with his transformation complete, but with the promise of it. The 8 years of hard labor aren't just punishment for the murders, they are the necessary crucible for breaking down his pride and allowing a new life based on humility and shared humanity, potentially to begin. Sonia's love is the catalyst.
What an incredible arc. This deep dive really shows how Dostoevsky weaves everything together, the psychology, the philosophy, the social commentary.
It's masterful. You trace Raskolnikov's journey from this cold, abstract theory hatched in isolation through the bloody, chaotic reality of the crime and into the devastating human consequences for everyone involved. Marmeladov's suffering, Lizaveta's pointless death, Luzhin's scheming.
And you see these two starkly contrasting outcomes. Svidrigailov choosing nihilism and self-destruction, and Raskolnikov, guided by Sonia, taking the long, painful path towards confession and potential redemption.
The richness comes from the characters the sources highlight, too. You've got Katerina Ivanovna's tragic pride, Dunya's strength, Razumihin's loyalty, Porfiry's unsettling intellect, Lebeziatnikov's naive idealism, unexpectedly trumping Luzhin's cynical calculation.
And it's all grounded in such visceral detail. That Petersburg stench, the price of the pond watch, the chaos of the funeral dinner, it prevents the philosophical debates from ever feeling purely abstract. You feel the human cost of Raskolnikov's idea.
Every element seems designed to test his theory against reality, and the theory always shatters.
So connecting back to the listener, the real challenge Dostoevsky leaves us with is understanding Raskolnikov's collapse. He committed the crime, he dared, but he couldn't sustain it. His intellect wasn't enough to shield him from his own humanity, his fear, his conscience, his need for connection.
Which leads to that final provocative thought. If Raskolnikov didn't truly feel moral guilt for the murders in Siberia, only regret for failing to be extraordinary, what was the deeper sin that required 8 years of suffering before resurrection could even begin?
Maybe the real crime, in Dostoevsky's eyes, wasn't the killing itself, but the profound spiritual arrogance and isolation of his theory. The attempt to stand outside and above humanity.
Perhaps the punishment wasn't just for the act, but for the idea. And the long path to redemption was simply the slow, painful process of realizing that his grand theory was a delusion, and that true life could only be found back within the flawed, suffering, interconnected human family.